So maybe the questions we can address here is, how can a good God allow evil and or suffering to exist?
Yes.
And especially when we think of those who seem innocent young
Yes.
children.
Yes. First of all, I think we need to ask, what is evil? And the classic definition for thousands of years has been that evil is a privation of goodness that should be there, or evil is a lack of what should be there. It is a lack of the good. So, for example, the reason having a colorblind eye is evil is because that is a lack of something I should have, or the person should have. So evil is a privation. It is a lack of something that ought to be there. So you could have good without evil, but you couldn't have evil without good, because evil is a lack of the good. That's why the biblical terms for sin are terms like missing the mark. You understand that? Now, you could have a mark without a missing of the mark, but there couldn't be a missing of the mark if there weren't a mark. You understand? So now the atheist is in a very serious problem, because evil actually provides evidence for God's existence, not against his existence, and here's how. Can there be such a thing as a bad, or let's just say evil, carburetor in a car? Of course. What do we mean when we say that is a bad carburetor? We mean it's not working the way it's supposed to work. What does that mean? It means it's not working the way it was designed to work. Now contrast that with something that wasn't designed. Suppose that in my back patio, a group of 20 leaves blew up in a storm and were scattered across the patio, and I took my wife out the back door and I said, honey, you see that fourth leaf over there? You see where it is in that scattered hole? That is an evil leaf. It's not doing what it ought to do in the whole pile of leaves. Well, I would be crazy, because that pile of leaves was not designed in such a way that that fourth leaf has a role to play. So it can't fail to do what it's supposed to do, because there's nothing it was supposed to do. Why? It wasn't designed. Now that means then that evil presupposes a designer. The only way you can have evil is if there is a way things are supposed to be. And the only way there can be a way things are supposed to be is if there is a designer. So evil actually backs into an argument from God. Now, suppose this person advances this claim that given the amount of evil in the world, it's probably not the case that there's a God. I've first of all given you an answer to that, because evil actually provides evidence for God. But here's a second thing to say. We are too limited and finite to know just exactly what percentage of evil would be okay to have. And when do you step over that line? You with me? And so we have God permitting 9/11. Should God have permitted the terrorist attack on 9/11? Was that in the long run something that God was justified in permitting? Well, what if somebody says God wasn't justified? That was something he should have stopped, and he didn't, so he's culpable. There's probably not a God. Now, how could we make a judgment like that? Here's how. We would have to know the long-term effects over the next 100 years of God allowing that event to take place. And what we would have to do is to compare the net balance of good and bad results of God letting that happen over the next 100 years with the net sum of good and bad results if God didn't permit that in happening. And what God should do would be to permit the option that in the long run produce the greatest amount of good versus bad. Now, is there anybody in their right mind that thinks they have access to enough information to make that calculation? I sure don't. I don't know how anybody could even start doing something like that. So the probability argument basically doesn't make any sense because none of us is in a position to calculate what would be a permissible probability and what would be an impermissible probability. And by the way, the person who raises that objection, if God started eliminating evil, they wouldn't want him to start by eliminating their evil. They would like him to start by eliminating other people's evil, but not in their case. So those are some. Now, why did God allow evil in the world? Because he gave to creatures free will, and their choice not to follow what he commanded was not up to God, it was up to them. Their choice was not coerced. God foreknew that it would happen and regretted it. He did not want it to happen, but God valued free will enough to allow that to happen. My children are walking with the Lord now, but they could turn away. And I would much rather have had children that were not robots and automatons, but actually had free will, because now if they tell me they love me, which they do, I actually think it means something. If they were robots that were programmed to go, I love you, I wouldn't get too much out of that. So I think that the gift of free will was the overriding good that God accomplished by allowing for the possibility of evil to exist, and the actuality of evil was due to the free choice of God's creatures, not God himself. And God is going to redeem that by bringing good out of bad. And that's what the history of human history is about, is the progressive triumph of good over evil.